Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has made a striking declaration. In an interview published on Saturday on the official website of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Pezeshkian said that Iran is now engaged in what he described as a full-fledged war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. In my opinion, we are in a full-fledged war with America, Israel, and Europe, Pezeshkian said. They do not want our country to stand on its feet. Pezeshkian is framing the current pressure campaign as a kind of war, not a future scenario, but what he sees as the present reality. And when you look at what has happened over the past year, the strikes, the sanctions, the frozen negotiations, his characterization deserves serious consideration. This is a story about power, pressure, and what happens when diplomacy fails. And it comes at a critical moment. Just as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prepares to meet with President Donald Trump to discuss potential future military options regarding Iran, Pezeshkian made a comparison that reveals how seriously Tehran views the current situation. He compared the pressure Iran faces today to the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, one of the bloodiest conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history, with casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands. But Pezeshkian argued that what Iran faces now is actually worse. This war is worse than Iraq's war against us, he said. If one understands it well, this war is far more complex and difficult than that war. The Iran-Iraq war lasted 8 years. It involved trench warfare, chemical weapons, and massive loss of life. It devastated both countries. So when the Iranian president says the current situation is worse, he's making an extraordinary claim. His reasoning is about the nature of the conflict. During the Iran-Iraq war, the battle lines were clear. Missiles were fired, and Iran knew where to strike back. The enemy was visible. At that time, missiles were fired, and it was clear where we would strike back, Pezeshkian explained. Today, according to the Iranian president, the war is being waged on multiple fronts simultaneously: economic, political, cultural, and security, making it far more difficult to respond. What does this multi-front war look like from Tehran's perspective? Pezeshkian argues the U.S., Israel, and European powers are acting in coordination to weaken Iran. On the economic front, Iran faces crippling sanctions. Since returning to office in January, President Trump has revived his maximum pressure strategy, the same approach he pursued during his first term. The goal is explicit: to dry up Iran's oil revenues and economically pressure the country. On the political front, Iran finds itself increasingly isolated. Diplomatic channels that were open just months ago have now frozen. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program that began in April have stalled completely since the June strikes. On the security front, Iran has faced direct military attacks. In June, international reports say Israel struck Iranian military and nuclear-linked sites. Details beyond the strikes are disputed. Reuters reported the U.S. struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites, a major escalation. And on the cultural front, Iran sees efforts to undermine its society from within, though this aspect receives less attention in Western media. From Tehran's perspective, this is not a series of unrelated pressures. It's what Iranian leaders describe as a coordinated campaign, a war waged through means other than conventional military invasion. Let's examine what happened in June, because the scale of the conflict is often understated in Western reporting. Israel and Iran engaged in a 12-day war in June. It was triggered by an unprecedented Israeli attack on Iranian military and nuclear-linked sites, as well as what Iranian authorities describe as civilian areas. Iranian authorities say the death toll was around 1,000, including senior military commanders and nuclear scientists. Outside verification has been limited. Around 1,000 people killed in less than 2 weeks, according to Tehran. Iran responded by launching hundreds of missiles and drones toward Israel. International reports put Israel's death toll in the high 20s. The United States assisted Israel in intercepting Iranian attacks. American air defense systems helped shoot down Iranian missiles and drones. And then the U.S. went further. Reuters reported the U.S. struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites on June 22nd, a major escalation. This is significant. The United States didn't just help defend Israel. It actively participated in offensive strikes against Iranian territory, according to multiple reports. This involvement effectively killed the diplomatic track. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program that had begun in April came to an immediate halt. Washington's involvement transformed what might have been a bilateral unilateral Israel-Iran conflict into something larger, a direct confrontation between Iran and the world's most powerful military. From Tehran's perspective, this confirmed what Iranian leaders have long argued, that Israel and the United States operate as a unified force in the region, with American military power backing Israeli actions. For critics of U.S. policy, this raises uncomfortable questions. Was direct military involvement necessary? Did it serve American interests or primarily Israeli interests? And what are the long-term consequences of turning Iran into a direct enemy of both countries simultaneously? Since returning to the White House in January, President Trump has revived his maximum pressure policy against Iran. This is the same approach Trump pursued during his first term, comprehensive sanctions designed to strangle Iran's economy and force it to capitulate on nuclear and regional issues. The strategy includes additional sanctions targeting Iran's oil exports. The goal is to cut off Iran's primary source of revenue, making it difficult for the government to fund its military, support regional allies, or provide services to its own population. Critics of this approach point out that maximum pressure failed during Trump's first term. Iran didn't capitulate. Instead, it accelerated its nuclear program, expanded regional influence, and waited out the Trump administration. When Biden took office, he attempted a different approach: diplomacy and negotiation. But that effort ultimately stalled as well. Now maximum pressure is back, and the question is whether it will produce different results this time or simply deepen the confrontation. It's not just the United States applying pressure. European governments say UN sanctions snapped back on Iran over its nuclear file in September. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom triggered the mechanism, citing concerns over Iran's nuclear program. This is significant because it shows that the confrontation extends beyond America and Israel. European powers, or traditional U.S. allies, have joined the pressure campaign. From Tehran's perspective, this confirms that Iran faces not just American hostility, but a unified Western front. The European sanctions add to the economic pressure Iran already faces. They further restrict trade, financial transactions, and diplomatic engagement. And they send a political message that Iran cannot escape pressure by negotiating with Europe while waiting out American administrations. This is part of what Pezeshkian means when he talks about a full-fledged war with Europe. Not military conflict, but coordinated pressure designed to weaken Iran on every front. Diplomatic channels that were open just months ago have now frozen. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program began in April. There was cautious optimism that some agreement might be reached, if not a comprehensive deal, at least measures to prevent further escalation. But the June strikes changed everything. When the United States directly struck Iranian nuclear facilities, it effectively ended the diplomatic track. Tehran concluded that Washington was not serious about negotiation, that military pressure was the real American policy. Since then, there has been no meaningful diplomatic engagement between Iran and the United States. This is dangerous. When diplomacy fails, the only remaining options are pressure and military force. And both sides appear to be moving in that direction. Iran is rebuilding its military capabilities, Israel is reportedly planning additional options, and the United States is tightening sanctions while keeping military options on the table. Without diplomatic channels, miscalculation becomes more likely. A crisis could spiral into war before anyone has a chance to de-escalate. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is visiting President Trump at Mar-a-Lago this weekend. Some reports say Netanyahu may urge tougher options on Iran's missile program. Reuters said it could not independently verify the NBC News report on the specific details of what Netanyahu will propose. NBC News has reported that Israeli officials believe Iran is rebuilding ballistic missile production sites and repairing air defense systems damaged during the June conflict. Israeli intelligence assessments have raised concerns that Iran's recent missile drills may mask preparations for a potential attack. Israeli military chief Eyal Zamir raised these concerns directly with U.S. Central Command Chief Admiral Brad Cooper, according to reports, warning that Iranian missile movements could be used as cover for a surprise operation targeting Israel. So Netanyahu is reportedly coming to Trump with requests regarding Iran's missile capabilities. This would represent another significant escalation if approved. The June strikes targeted nuclear facilities. Strikes on missile production would target Iran's conventional deterrent, its ability to respond to attacks. From Iran's perspective, this would be an attempt to disarm the country entirely, to leave it defenseless against future aggression. Pezeshkian's message to the West was clear: Iran is not backing down. Our dear military forces are doing their jobs with strength, he said. And now, in terms of equipment and manpower, despite all the problems we have, they are stronger than when they, Israel and the U.S., attacked. This is a direct warning. Despite the damage from the June strikes, despite the sanctions, despite the pressure, Iran claims it has emerged stronger. So if they want to attack, they will naturally face a more decisive response, Pezeshkian continued. The Iranian president is signaling that any future attack will be met with greater retaliation than what occurred in June. During the June conflict, Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones toward Israel. Many were intercepted, but some got through. Pezeshkian is suggesting that the next response would be even more severe. According to reports, Netanyahu's focus at Mar-a-Lago may be Iran's missile program. Israel views Iranian missiles as a significant threat. Iran has developed increasingly sophisticated ballistic missiles capable of reaching Israeli territory. During the June conflict, Iranian missiles demonstrated their capability, and even if many were intercepted, Israel's calculation appears to be that degrading Iran's missile production capacity would reduce the threat of future attacks. But Iran views its missile program very differently. Iranian officials have consistently said that the country's missile capabilities are purely defensive, designed to deter aggression, not to initiate conflict. From Tehran's perspective, Iran has no nuclear weapons. It does not have the conventional military power of the United States or even Israel. Missiles are its primary deterrent and its ability to impose costs on any country that attacks it. Striking Iran's missile program would be seen in Tehran as an attempt to leave Iran defenseless, to enable future attacks without consequence. This is why Pezeshkian emphasized that Iran's defensive capabilities are not a matter that can be openly discussed or negotiated away. If the enemy chooses confrontation, they will naturally face a more decisive reaction. This warning from Pezeshkian should be taken seriously. Iran has demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to respond to attacks. The June missile launches showed that Iran can strike Israeli territory, even if not all missiles reach their targets. And Iran has regional allies that extend its reach: Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, who have demonstrated the ability to disrupt global shipping. A new round of strikes against Iran would likely trigger responses across the region, not just from Iran directly, but from its network of allies. This is the danger of the current trajectory. Each escalation provokes a response. Each response provokes further escalation, and the cycle continues until someone miscalculates or decides that full-scale war is preferable to continued escalation. At the heart of the confrontation is a fundamental dispute about Iran's nuclear program. The United States and its allies accuse Iran of seeking to acquire nuclear weapons. Iran has repeatedly denied this claim. Tehran maintains that its nuclear program is entirely peaceful, focused on energy production and medical research, not weapons development. This dispute has lasted decades. It was the subject of the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which placed limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. The Trump administration withdrew from that deal during its first term. Since then, Iran has gradually exceeded the deal's limits, enriching uranium to higher levels and expanding its nuclear infrastructure. Critics of U.S. policy argue that withdrawing from the JCPOA was a catastrophic mistake. The deal, whatever its flaws, provided verification mechanisms and limits on Iran's program. Without it, Iran has more freedom to advance its nuclear capabilities. Supporters of the withdrawal argue that the deal was too weak, that it didn't address Iran's missile program or regional activities. But regardless of who is right about the deal, the current situation is clear. There is no agreement, no verification, and no diplomatic path forward. Western media typically frames Iran as the aggressor in the region, a destabilizing force supporting terrorism and threatening peace. But it's worth considering how the situation looks from Tehran. Iran argues it hasn't launched major invasions in modern times, though it has carried out cross-border strikes that neighbors condemned. The 1980s war with Iraq was initiated by Iraq with significant support from the United States and Western allies, who provided weapons and intelligence to Saddam Hussein. In recent decades, Iran has watched the United States invade and occupy two of its neighbors, Afghanistan and Iraq. It has seen regime change operations and political upheavals in the region, and now it faces direct military strikes from Israel and the United States, along with comprehensive economic sanctions designed to pressure its economy. From this perspective, Iran sees itself as a country defending against external pressure by the world's most powerful nations. This doesn't mean Iran's actions are always justified, but understanding how Tehran sees the situation is essential for understanding its behavior. Israeli officials present a different picture. Speaking about the regional situation, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said, "We are not seeking confrontation with anyone. No one seeks confrontation. On the contrary, we seek stability, prosperity, and peace." But he also warned, any action against Israel will be met with a very harsh response. Israel frames its actions as defensive responses to Iranian activities, not provocations. Israeli officials point to Iranian support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups that have attacked Israel. They point to Iranian statements about Israel. They point to the missile and drone launches. From Israel's perspective, Iran represents a significant threat that must be contained through military pressure and, if necessary, preemptive strikes. The question is whether this approach is making Israel safer or whether it's creating a cycle of escalation that increases the risk of broader war. Israeli intelligence has raised concerns about Iran's recent military exercises. According to Israeli assessments, Iran's missile drills may mask preparations for a potential attack. We know that Iran has been doing exercises lately. We are following this and we are making the necessary preparations, Israeli officials have stated. These concerns were reportedly raised directly with U.S. Central Command, warning that Iranian missile movements could be used as cover for a surprise operation targeting Israel. Iran, for its part, says the exercises are purely defensive. Iranian officials have stated that the country's military capabilities exist for the steadfast defense of Iran's national integrity and its very existence, and said not for aggression. Our armed forces know very well and are perfectly capable of defending ourselves whenever the need arises, Iranian officials have said. The competing narratives make the situation more dangerous. Each side interprets the other's actions through a lens of suspicion. Defensive preparations look like offensive preparations. Exercises look like cover for attacks. This is how wars start, through miscalculation and misinterpretation. Iran has also raised concerns about the International Atomic Energy Agency and its Director General. According to Iranian officials, past agreements with the IAEA have been undermined by Western interference. At one point, we engaged in discussions with the agency to resolve this issue. An understanding was reached and signed by both sides, Iranian officials explained. But once again, it was the Western parties who obstructed the advancement of this process. Iran accuses the IAEA Director General of pursuing political objectives rather than technical verification. This speaks to a broader Iranian complaint that international institutions are not neutral arbiters but tools of Western policy, that rules are applied selectively with different standards for different countries. Whether this complaint is justified is debatable, but it helps explain why Iran is skeptical of international mechanisms and why it feels it cannot rely on diplomatic processes for its security. The Iran confrontation doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a broader pattern of great power competition. Russia and China have both maintained relationships with Iran despite Western pressure. Iran has become an important partner for Russia, providing drones used in Ukraine and potentially other military assistance. The BRICS grouping, which includes Russia, China, India, Brazil, and South Africa, has expanded its influence as an alternative to Western-dominated institutions. From this perspective, Western pressure on Iran is part of a larger effort to maintain American and European influence in a world that is becoming increasingly multipolar. Countries that resist Western pressure, i.e. whether Russia, China, or Iran, are subjected to sanctions, military threats, and various forms of pressure. Countries that align with Western preferences receive trade, investment, and security support. Iran has chosen resistance, and it is paying the price. But Tehran believes that the alternative, accepting Western demands, would be worse. It would mean abandoning sovereignty, accepting foreign influence over Iranian policy, and compromising its independence. The meeting between Netanyahu and Trump at Mar-a-Lago could have significant consequences. If Trump agrees to support further military action against Iran, particularly strikes on missile production facilities, it would represent a major escalation.
It would also bind the United States more tightly to Israeli military operations, potentially drawing America into a broader regional conflict.
On the other hand, if Trump declines to support additional strikes, it could create tension in the U.S.-Israel relationship and potentially limit Israeli options. Trump's maximum pressure strategy relies primarily on economic sanctions. Direct military strikes are a different matter. They carry risks of escalation, regional war, and American casualties. The president must weigh the arguments against the potential costs of deeper military involvement, and he must consider whether escalation serves American interests or primarily other interests. Iran's strategy appears to be twofold: resistance and deterrence. Resistance means refusing to capitulate to Western demands. It means continuing to develop military capabilities, maintaining regional alliances, and waiting out pressure campaigns. Deterrence means maintaining the ability to impose unacceptable costs on any country that attacks Iran. This is why the missile program is so important to Tehran. It's the foundation of Iran's deterrent capability. Pezeshkian's statements reinforce both elements of this strategy. On resistance, they do not want our country to stand on its feet, but Iran will not yield. On deterrence, if they want to attack, they will naturally face a more decisive response. Whether this strategy will succeed is uncertain. Iran faces severe economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and the constant threat of military strikes. But Tehran appears to believe that resistance is preferable to submission, and that eventually the costs of confrontation will lead Western powers to negotiate on more favorable terms. The stakes of this confrontation extend far beyond Iran. If escalation continues, more strikes, more retaliation, more escalation, the result could be a regional war involving Iran, Israel, the United States, and potentially other countries. Such a war would devastate the Middle East. It would disrupt global oil supplies, spike energy prices, and send shockwaves through the global economy. American forces in the region, in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere, could face attacks from Iranian allies. Israel could face missile barrages that challenge its air defenses. The cost would be enormous in lives, in treasure, and in regional stability. The alternative is a negotiated settlement, but that would require both sides to make concession, and right now, neither side appears willing. The United States wants Iran to abandon its nuclear ambitions, curtail its missile program, and end support for regional allies. Iran wants sanctions lifted, its security guaranteed, and its sovereignty respected. Bridging that gap would require diplomacy, and diplomacy requires channels that are currently frozen. We are at a dangerous moment. Iran's president has declared that his country is facing a full-fledged war with the United States, Israel, and Europe, a war he says is worse than the Iran-Iraq conflict that killed hundreds of thousands. Iranian authorities say around 1,000 people were killed in the June strikes, though outside verification has been limited. Reuters reported the United States struck 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Diplomatic channels have frozen, sanctions are intensifying, and Netanyahu is reportedly meeting Trump to discuss military options. Iran says it is militarily stronger than before and ready to respond decisively to any new attacks. The cycle of escalation continues. Each side believes it is defending itself. Each side blames the other for the confrontation. Without diplomacy, the only path forward is pressure and force, and that path leads toward war. The decisions made at Mar-a-Lago and in Tehran will shape what happens next. The world is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher.